Who poisoned my best friend? I walked into English class 5 minutes late to find my best friend dead in the middle of the floor. My classmates and teacher were all standing around him like frozen statues. Will was lying there, face twisted like he'd died in the middle of a scream. I dropped my backpack and ran to him, grabbing his shoulders and shaking him like maybe he was playing a prank, but his body was already cold. What happened? I screamed at everyone kneeling on the floor, but they just stared at me with these blank, shocked faces. He just randomly started choking, Sophia finally said. Then he fell and started convulsing. The paramedics showed up, but they didn't hurry because one look told them what we already knew. Will was dead. The police separated us all for questioning, and that's when they told me Will had been poisoned. They found his water bottle on his desk and tested it right there, and the detective's face went grim when he saw the results. Where were you before class? The detective asked me. I was in the bathroom, I said. I was late. And before that? Walking to school with Will like always. He wrote something down. Anyone ever have problems with Will? I thought about Hazel, who Will dumped 2 weeks ago. Josh, who Will accused of cheating and got Josh suspended. But I didn't want to throw someone probably innocent under the bus, so I just shrugged. They let us go home but said not to leave town. I sat in my car and watched my classmates leave one by one, noticing how they all avoided looking at me. That's when I realized they thought I did it. I was Will's best friend. I was late to class. I was the last person he was with. That night I lay in bed thinking about how Will and I were supposed to go to the same college next year, how he'd been the only person who really got my stupid jokes. Now he was gone and everyone thought I killed him. At his funeral, Will's mom grabbed my arm and whispered, "The police keep asking about you, but I trust you loved him." Even she had doubts. I stood at his grave after everyone left and promised him I'd find out who did this. Back at school, everyone shifted away when I walked into English. They'd replaced the carpet, but I could still see the spot where Will had died. I kept expecting him to walk in late with some ridiculous excuse about oversleeping. Instead, there was just his empty desk that nobody would sit in. I didn't kill him, I said to the room randomly on the third day back. Nobody said you did, Mrs. DePhillips replied, but her voice shook. I went to the bathroom and bit down on my sweatshirt sleeve, crying so hard my whole body shook. I started investigating partly to find the killer and partly to clear my name. I went through Will's texts and found out he'd been selling Adderall to half the class. He'd hooked up with someone's girlfriend at a party. More people than I thought had motive, but I was the only one who'd been alone with him that morning. The detective called me back in. You brought him coffee that morning, didn't you? We always got coffee, I said. But you were late to class. Where did you really go? The bathroom, I said again. He jotted something down and let me go, but I could tell he didn't believe me. I couldn't stop thinking about Will that morning when he'd laughed at something stupid I'd said. How was he dead 20 minutes later? I started watching everyone obsessively. Sophia, who'd been failing English until Will started tutoring her. Josh, who'd lost his scholarship because of the suspension. Hazel, who'd cried for a week after the breakup. 3 weeks after Will died, I found a note in my locker. "We know you did it." My hands shook as I read it. The real killer was out there letting me take the blame while Will was rotting in the ground. Then I found something in Will's phone that I'd kept since his mom had given it to me. A draft text to me from that morning. Never sent. Need to tell you something about Sophia before English. Important. Sophia? The timestamp was 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes before class started. Whatever Will had wanted to tell me, someone had made sure he never could. I confronted Sophia after school, showed her the text. "What did Will know about you?" She went pale. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Her eyes got huge and she took a step back from me, almost tripping over the curb. Her hands were shaking so bad she dropped her backpack and it hit the pavement with this loud thud that made us both jump. I could see her trying to come up with something to say, but her mouth just opened and closed without any sound coming out. She shook her head really fast and backed up another step toward her car. "I don't know what he wanted to tell you," she finally got out, but her voice was all weird and high. "I seriously don't know." Her hands kept shaking as she picked up her backpack, and I watched her eyes dart around the parking lot like she was looking for an escape route. "Sophia, you're lying," I said, but she was already backing away faster. "I have to go," she said, and then she pretty much ran to her car. I stood there watching her drive away way too fast and almost hit another car pulling out of the lot. She knew something. The way her whole body went stiff when she saw that text, the way she couldn't even look at me. All of it screamed that Will had known something about her that got him killed. That night I couldn't sleep. So I pulled out my phone and started going through every memory I had of Will and Sophia together. They were always in the library during study hall, sitting at that table in the back corner near the history section. Will would have his laptop out and Sophia would be writing stuff down in her notebook, and I always thought they were working on English homework since she was supposedly failing. But now that I really thought about it, Sophia was actually pretty smart. She got good grades in her other classes, and she was always raising her hand in history to answer questions that nobody else knew. So why would she need tutoring in English? And why would Will be the one doing it when he barely passed English himself last year? I remembered walking past them once and seeing Sophia slide a piece of paper across the table to Will, and he'd looked at it and nodded before putting it in his backpack. At the time, I figured it was just homework or notes or whatever, but now it felt different. Now it felt like maybe she was doing his work for him, not the other way around. The more I thought about it, the more I realized they spent way more time together than I'd noticed. They were always talking in the hallway between classes, and sometimes Sophia would look upset or stressed, and Will would have this smile on his face that I'd thought was friendly, but now seemed kind of mean. The next morning, I got to the school early and waited by Sophia's locker. When she saw me standing there, she froze and looked like she might turn around and leave, but I held up my hands to show I wasn't going to yell at her or anything. "I just want to understand what happened to my best friend," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my heart was beating really fast. "Please, Sophia. I know you're scared, but I need to know the truth." She stared at me for a long time, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. Then she looked around to make sure nobody was listening and moved closer to me. "Will was blackmailing me," she whispered, and the words came out like they'd been stuck inside her forever. "He found out that my dad is in prison, and he said he'd tell everyone if I didn't do his homework for him." My stomach dropped, and I felt sick. "What?" I said. "For how long?" She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "Since the beginning of the year. He said everyone would make fun of me and that colleges would find out and it would ruin my life. So I wrote his English papers and did his reading assignments and basically did all his work while he got to hang out and party and sell pills to people." The tears were really coming now, and she wasn't even trying to hide them anymore. "I finally decided I couldn't take it anymore. I was going to report him to the counselor that morning." "That morning?" I said, and everything clicked into place. "That's why he wanted to tell me about you." "He knew you were going to report him." Sophia nodded and more tears ran down her face. "I had an appointment with the counselor at 8:30. I was supposed to tell her everything and show her the texts where Will threatened me, but then he died before I could get there, and now I feel so terrible because part of me was relieved that he was gone, and I wouldn't have to deal with him anymore." She covered her face with her hands. "I know that's awful, but I can't help it. He made my life horrible for months, and I was finally going to be free, and then he just died, and everyone thinks I should be sad, but I'm not. I'm just guilty for not being sad." I didn't know what to say to that because it was a lot to process. Will had been my best friend, but he'd also been this person who hurt Sophia, so bad that she was relieved when he died. "Where were you that morning before class?" I asked, and I hated that I had to ask, but I needed to know. "In the counselor's office," she said. "I got there at 8:20 and waited until they told me Will was dead." "The counselor can tell you. I never left that office until after first period started." I asked Detective Ware about Sophia's alibi, and he confirmed she was in the counselor's office from 8:20 until after Will died. The counselor remembered because Sophia had been crying in the waiting area, and she'd been trying to calm her down when they got the news about Will. That meant Sophia couldn't have poisoned Will's water bottle at the coffee shop or in the classroom. She was sitting in that office the whole time, waiting to report him for something he'd never have to answer for. Detective Ware called me in for more questioning a few days later, and this time he wanted to know all about my relationship with Sophia. I told him everything she'd revealed about Will blackmailing her and making her do his homework, and I watched his face change as I talked. His eyes got sharper and he started writing faster in his notebook. "So your friend was coercing multiple students," he said, and it wasn't really a question. "Did you know about any of this?" I shook my head. "I had no idea. I thought he was just tutoring people and selling some pills on the side. I didn't know about the blackmail." Detective Ware leaned back in his chair and studied me. "The more we dig into your friend's activities, the more people we find who had reasons to want him gone. This is looking less like you're the prime suspect and more like we need to figure out who else he was threatening." I realized I needed to stop focusing on people's motives and start figuring out exactly when someone could have poisoned Will's water bottle. I sat down at my desk that night and drew out a timeline of that morning. We got coffee together at 8 o'clock like we always did. We walked to the school together and got there around 8:20. Will went straight to his locker and then to English class while I stopped at the bathroom. He died at 8:55, which meant the poison had to be in his water bottle sometime between 8 and 8:55. But when did someone have the chance to put it there? The water bottle was in Will's hand or in his backpack the whole time except for when he set it down to get our coffee drinks. I needed to go back to the coffee shop and figure out if someone could have accessed it there. The next morning I went to the coffee shop before school and found Skylar working behind the counter. She recognized me right away because Will and I came in every single morning. "Hey," she said, and her face got sad. "I heard about Will. I'm really sorry." I thanked her and asked if she remembered that morning when we came in. "Of course," she said. "You guys were regulars." Will always got the same thing, and he always refilled his water bottle at our filtered water station while he waited for the drinks. That detail made me stop. "The water station?" I said. "Where is that?" She pointed to a spot near the counter but kind of off to the side, where there was this big water dispenser with a filtration system. "It's right there." Will would set his bottle under the tap and fill it up while looking at his phone. He did it every time. "Can you see that spot from the register?" I asked, and Skylar looked over at it and shook her head. "Not really. It's kind of in a blind spot because of that display case. During the morning rush, I'm making drinks and taking orders, so I'm not really watching that area. Anyone could walk over there and I probably wouldn't notice unless they bumped into something." My heart started beating faster because this was it. This was when someone could have done it. "Do you remember anyone else from the school being here that morning?" I asked. Skylar thought about it for a minute, chewing on her lip. "There were a lot of people that morning because it was right before school started, but I do remember seeing someone in a dark hoodie standing near that area. I thought it was weird because they weren't ordering anything, just kind of lingering. I couldn't see their face because of the hood, but they seemed like they were waiting for something." She paused. "Or someone." I thanked Skylar and left the coffee shop with my mind racing about who that person in the dark hoodie could have been. Back at the school the next day, I walked into the hallway between 3rd and 4th period and saw Josh standing by his locker wearing a dark hoodie with the sleeves pushed up. My stomach dropped and I stopped walking right in the middle of the hallway. He looked up and caught me staring at him and his face went hard. He slammed his locker shut and walked straight toward me. "What's your problem?" he said, and his voice came out defensive and angry. "I'm tired of you looking at me like I'm some kind of killer." I opened my mouth to say something, but he kept going. "You think I don't notice you watching me all the time? You think I don't hear people whispering about me because of what Will did?" His hands were shaking, and I couldn't tell if it was from anger or fear or something else. "I just saw Skylar at the coffee shop," I said. "She mentioned someone in a dark hoodie that morning." Josh's eyes went wide for a second, and then he laughed, but it sounded fake. "Half the school has these hoodies," he said. "They sold them as a fundraiser 2 years ago for the AV Club. Stop trying to pin this on me just because you need someone to blame." He pushed past me and walked away, and I stood there feeling stupid and confused because he was right that lots of people had those hoodies, but also his reaction seemed way too intense for someone who had nothing to hide. I needed help figuring this out because I was getting nowhere on my own and making enemies out of everyone. Lola McCarty wrote for the school newspaper, and she was smart and good at digging up information that people tried to keep quiet. I found her in the journalism room after school working on her laptop. She looked up when I came in, and her expression was careful, like she wasn't sure if she wanted to talk to me. "Can I help you with something?" she said. I sat down across from her and explained everything about Will's death and the investigation and how I was trying to figure out who really did it. "I need someone who knows how to investigate things properly," I said. "Someone who can help me find evidence instead of just making wild guesses." Lola leaned back in her chair and studied me for a long time. "I don't want to exploit Will's death for a story," she said finally. "That feels wrong." I shook my head. "This isn't about a story. This is about finding out the truth. Will was my best friend and someone killed him and everyone thinks I did it." She bit her lip and I could see her thinking it through. "What if we could prove the school didn't do enough to stop whatever was happening?" she said. "What if this is bigger than just one person poisoning another person?" I hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right that the school seemed more interested in covering things up than actually helping. "Okay," she said. "I'll help you, but we do this right. We follow actual investigative procedures, and we don't accuse people without evidence." The first thing Lola suggested was requesting security footage from the school to see who had access to Will's stuff before class started that morning. She explained that schools have to respond to formal records requests, and we had a good reason to ask for them because of the ongoing police investigation. We spent an hour drafting the request letter and making sure we cited all the right policies and procedures. Then we walked together to Principal Lockhart's office and submitted it to her secretary. The secretary said the principal would review it and get back to us within 5 business days. 3 days later, I got called to the principal's office. Lola was already there, sitting in one of the chairs looking annoyed. Principal Lockhart had our request letter on her desk, and her face was tight with disapproval. "I'm denying this request," she said without any greeting or small talk. "Student privacy concerns and the ongoing police investigation make it impossible for us to release this footage. But the police might not be looking at the right things," I said. "They think I did it and they're not investigating other possibilities. That's not our problem," Principal Lockhart said. "Our job is to protect all our students' privacy and maintain a safe learning environment. Releasing security footage to students would violate both of those responsibilities." Lola leaned forward. "What about the responsibility to find out who killed a student in your classroom?" she said. "Doesn't that matter more than protecting whoever did it?" Principal Lockhart's face went red. "I understand you're both upset about Will's death," she said. "But I won't have you disrupting this school with amateur detective work. The police are handling the investigation. Let them do their job." We left her office and I felt like punching a wall because it was so obvious she cared more about the school's reputation than actually finding out who killed Will. 2 days after that, Detective Ware called me and asked me to come to the station. When I got there, he had a file folder open on his desk with a bunch of papers inside. The toxicology report came back with more details, he said. The poison that killed your friend was a pesticide derivative, specifically something similar to malathion. Do you know what that is? I shook my head. It's used to kill insects on plants, he said. Agricultural use mostly, but also in greenhouses and gardens. Do you know if Will had any connection to pesticides or gardening? My brain started working fast. We have a greenhouse at the school, I said, for biology class. We grow plants there, and I think they store chemicals and stuff for treating them. Detective Ware wrote something down. Who has access to that greenhouse? Lots of students volunteer there, I said, and then I remembered something that made my stomach hurt. Hazel volunteers there. She loves gardening. She was there all the time when she and Will were dating. The detective looked up at me. Hazel is the ex-girlfriend? I nodded. She would know about pesticides. She would know where they're kept and how to use them. I left the police station feeling sick because I didn't want it to be Hazel, but the evidence kept pointing toward her. That afternoon, I went to the greenhouse after school and found her there watering some tomato plants. She looked up when I walked in, and her whole body went tense. "What are you doing here?" she said. "I need to ask you about the pesticides," I said, "the ones they keep in here." Hazel set down the watering can and her hands were shaking. "I know where they're kept," she said quietly. "In the locked cabinet by the sink. But I would never hurt Will. I know he hurt me, but I wouldn't kill him." Her voice broke on the last word, and I could see tears starting in her eyes. "He didn't just dump me," she said. "He cheated on me with like 3 different girls. And when I confronted him about it, he told everyone I was clingy and unstable and making things up. He made people think I was crazy." She was crying hard now and wiping at her face with her sleeve. "I hated him so much, but I loved him too, and I don't know how both those things can be true at the same time, but they are. It was tearing me apart even before he died." I stood there not knowing what to say because I understood that feeling of loving someone and hating them at the same time. Through her tears, Hazel admitted something else. "I tried to meet him that morning before school," she said. "I wanted to return some things he'd left at my house. I saw him at the coffee shop, but I couldn't do it. I just stood there like an idiot and then left without talking to him. That's why I've been acting so weird and guilty. I wanted to talk to him one more time and I didn't, and now I never can." I asked Detective Ware to check Hazel's story, and he called me back the next day. "Coffee shop security footage shows her entering at 8:15 and leaving 2 minutes later," he said. "She never approached Will or went near where he was sitting. Her timeline checks out. But here's the thing. That footage also shows at least 6 other people from your school were in that coffee shop during the window when the poisoning could have happened. We're looking at a much bigger pool of potential suspects than we thought." I started meeting up with Lola every day after school to go through everything we knew. She had this way of organizing information that made sense, like she could see patterns I was missing. We sat in the library on Thursday afternoon with her laptop open and a bunch of notes spread across the table. She pulled up the school's digital access logs that she'd gotten through some journalism club connection I didn't totally understand. Her finger traced down the screen and stopped on a name. Josh had signed into the AV room at 7:30 that morning, a full hour before school officially started. The AV room was right down the hall from our English classroom. He could have walked in there, done whatever he needed to do, and nobody would have seen him because the hallways were still empty that early. Lola looked at me, and I could tell she was thinking the same thing I was. "Josh had opportunity. I found Josh in the parking lot the next morning before first period." He was leaning against his car, scrolling through his phone, and he looked up when I walked over. I asked him why he was at the school so early the day Will died. His whole body went tense, and he shoved his phone in his pocket. He said he was working on a video project for his college applications and needed to use the editing software in the AV room. I asked why he never mentioned that to the police or to anyone else. He stepped closer to me and his voice got louder. He said I was desperately trying to pin this on anyone, but myself because I couldn't handle that everyone knew the truth. Maybe I should look in the mirror instead of harassing everyone else about where they were and what they were doing. He got in his car and drove off before I could say anything else. I sat in my car after Josh left and his words kept playing in my head. Part of me wondered if he was right. I went over that morning again like I'd done 1,000 times already. Will and I got coffee together. We walked to the school together. I went to the bathroom and he went to class. But what if I did something without realizing it? What if I bumped his water bottle when I wasn't paying attention? What if I touched something with poison on it and then touched his stuff? My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I tried to remember every single detail, but the more I thought about it, the less clear everything became. Did I pick up his backpack at any point? Did someone bump into me in the hallway and something transferred? I felt sick thinking that I might have killed my best friend by accident and didn't even know it. Sophia found me in the hallway between 3rd and 4th period that day. She pulled me into an empty classroom and closed the door behind us. Her voice was quiet, and she kept looking at the door like someone might walk in. She said she needed to tell me something about Will that she should have said before. He wasn't just making her do his homework. He was threatening to tell everyone that her dad was in prison if she didn't help him with whatever he needed. She'd been keeping that secret for 2 years, and Will found out somehow and used it against her. She said there were other people too. Will had dirt on half the school and wasn't afraid to use it. Other people knew about his blackmail stuff, and they had their own reasons to want him gone. She left before I could ask who else or what Will had on them. Everything I thought I knew about Will was wrong. I sat in English class that afternoon staring at his empty desk and realized I didn't actually know him at all. He was my best friend. We told each other everything, or at least I thought we did. But he was selling drugs and hooking up with people's girlfriends and blackmailing classmates, and I had no idea. He was hiding this whole other side of himself that was mean and manipulative. All those times he complained about other people causing drama, he was the one causing it. I felt stupid for defending him to everyone. I felt stupid for thinking he was this good person who someone murdered for no reason. Maybe someone had a pretty good reason. The school counselor called me down to her office during lunch. I'd been avoiding her because I didn't want to talk about my feelings or whatever, but she said it was mandatory, so I went. She had me sit in the chair across from her desk and asked how I was doing with everything. I said I was fine, which a lie. She said she knew I'd been investigating Will's death, and she wanted to make sure I was processing it in a healthy way. I told her I was finding out Will did a lot of bad things to people, and I didn't know how to feel about that. She leaned forward and said, "People can be both good friends to some and harmful to others. That doesn't mean our grief isn't real, or that we're bad for missing them." She said grieving someone doesn't mean pretending they were perfect. Seeking justice for them doesn't require defending everything they did. I left her office feeling slightly less terrible about the whole thing. Lola published an article in the school paper the next week. She didn't name Will specifically, but it was obvious who she was writing about. The article talked about how students at our school were dealing prescription drugs and using blackmail to control each other. She wrote about academic coercion and how the administration knew about these problems, but chose to ignore them because they cared more about the school's reputation than actually protecting students. The article exploded. Half the school was mad at her for making us all look bad. The other half was thanking her for finally talking about stuff everyone knew was happening, but nobody wanted to admit. Teachers were pulling her aside in the hallways. Principal Lockhart called her into the office. But Lola stood by everything she wrote. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table that weekend. They said they were worried about me. I'd been obsessed with this investigation for weeks, and it wasn't healthy. They thought I should let the police handle it and focus on healing and moving forward. I told them I couldn't move forward until I cleared my name. Everyone at the school still thought I killed Will. The police still thought I was their main suspect. I needed to understand what really happened, even if the truth was complicated and painful. My mom reached across the table and held my hand. She said she understood, but she was scared I was losing myself in this. My dad said they'd support me no matter what, but they wanted me to think about whether this investigation was helping me or hurting me. Detective Ware called me on Monday morning. He said he wanted to update me on where things stood. I was still technically a person of interest, but his investigation had expanded a lot based on everything I'd told him about Will's activities. He was interviewing multiple students now. He was looking into the greenhouse pesticide inventory and who had access to those chemicals. He was checking access logs for different parts of the school building. He said the case was more complicated than they initially thought, and it might take a while to sort through all the evidence and testimonies. But he wanted me to know they were taking it seriously and looking at everyone who might have had motive and opportunity. I was cleaning out my backpack that night and found the receipt from the coffee shop tucked in the bottom. I almost threw it away, but then I looked at the timestamp. 7:58 a.m. We were there from 7:58 to 8:11. 13 minutes. I did the math in my head. Will died around 9. Class started at 9. We left the coffee shop at 8:11 and got to the school around 8:25. That meant someone poisoned Will's water bottle in a 13-minute window, either at the coffee shop or right after we got to the school. 13 minutes when someone slipped poison into his water knowing he'd drink it in class. 13 minutes that ended with my best friend dead on the floor. She stepped back from me and wrapped her arms around herself. Her eyes darted to the parking lot exit like she was thinking about running. I kept the phone screen pointed at her, showing the draft text Will never sent. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Then she shook her head fast and said she didn't know what Will meant by that text. I asked her again what Will knew about her, and she started crying. She said Will knew things about everyone and used them whenever he wanted something. She turned and walked to her car before I could ask anything else. I stood there watching her drive away and felt more confused than before. The next morning I went to my locker to grab my English textbook. Shoved between my biology notes was a hall pass I'd never seen before. The date showed it was from the week before Will died. It gave permission to access the greenhouse during lunch period. I stared at it, trying to remember using it, but came up blank. The handwriting looked almost like mine, but something felt wrong about it. The letters were too perfect, too careful. Someone had copied my writing style, but not quite right. My hands started shaking as I realized someone might have forged this to make it look like I had greenhouse access. I took a picture of the hall pass and texted it to Detective Ware asking if he knew anything about it. Then I walked straight to the greenhouse to talk to the supervisor. The greenhouse was attached to the science wing and smelled like dirt and chemicals mixed together. I found the supervisor watering plants near the back. She was an older woman who volunteered at the school and loved talking about her garden. I showed her the hall pass and asked if she remembered me coming in that week. She looked at it and frowned. She said she didn't specifically remember me, but a lot of students came through during lunch. Then I asked about the pesticide inventory and her face got serious. She led me to a locked cabinet against the wall and opened it with a key from her belt. Inside were bottles of different chemicals lined up on shelves. She pointed to one spot where a bottle was missing. She said a small container of malathion-based product had disappeared sometime in the past month. She pulled out a notebook showing the access log. About 15 names were listed as regular volunteers who knew the cabinet combination. But she admitted the log wasn't always kept up perfectly. Some students had access without signing in every time. I took pictures of the log pages and thanked her. Walking back through the main hallway, I felt someone grab my arm. Gabe Glenn pulled me aside near the trophy cases. He was the school resource officer and usually pretty cool, but right now he looked annoyed. He told me I needed to stop playing detective before I messed up the real investigation. I tried to explain I was just trying to clear my name, but he cut me off. He said he understood why I wanted answers, but proper legal stuff mattered more than my timeline. The way he said it, though, made me think he was actually trying to help in his own way. He was warning me to be careful, not telling me to stop completely. I nodded and he let go of my arm. That afternoon, I met Lola at the public library. She had her laptop open with a bunch of tabs about public records requests. She explained that we could formally request the school security footage and greenhouse access logs. It would start an official clock for the school to respond. She said it might take weeks, but it created a paper trail that made it harder for them to hide stuff. She helped me fill out the forms and we submitted them online. The next morning, Principal Lockhart made an announcement over the intercom during homeroom. She said the school would not be holding a memorial assembly for Will. She claimed the ongoing investigation and need to keep things normal made it impossible. Her voice sounded cold and robotic, like she was reading from a script. Everyone in my homeroom looked at each other. Someone muttered that it was messed up. I sat there feeling angry because it was obvious the school cared more about protecting their reputation than honoring a dead student. They didn't want to draw attention to the fact that someone got murdered on campus. 2 days later, I opened my locker before lunch and another note fell out. This one was different from the first. It said, "Stop asking questions or you'll be next." My hands shook so bad I almost dropped it. I pulled out my phone and took pictures from every angle. Then I walked straight to the main office and asked to see Gabe. He came out and I showed him the note. His jaw got tight and he told me to wait while he called Detective Ware. The detective showed up 20 minutes later and took the note as evidence. He asked if I had any idea who might have put it there. I said no, but someone was clearly scared of what I might find out. I picked up the note again before they bagged it and smelled something weird. It had a faint chemical smell that reminded me of the cleaning supplies stored near the AV room. The custodial closets were in that area too. I mentioned this to Detective Ware and he wrote it down. This detail meant whoever wrote the note probably had access to those spaces. That narrowed things down to students with special privileges or work-study positions in those areas. After school, I found Josh in the parking lot by his car. I asked him about the threatening note since he had AV room access. He spun around and got right in my face. He shouted that he had an alibi and I needed to stop harassing him. His face was red and spit flew when he yelled. He said he was with a teacher that whole morning discussing his suspension appeal. She could verify he never left her office until right before class started. He shoved past me and got in his car. I stood there watching him drive off way too fast. The next day, I went to the counselor's office to ask about Sophia's alibi. The counselor was a middle-aged woman who always seemed tired. I explained that Sophia said she was waiting for an appointment that morning and asked if that was true. The counselor folded her hands on her desk and said she couldn't verify or deny that because of privacy rules. I tried to explain it could help the investigation, but she just repeated that she was bound by professional ethics. Her face showed she felt bad about it, but she wasn't going to break the rules even when they seemed to work against finding the truth. I left her office feeling stuck. That night, Hazel texted me a screenshot. It showed a message from Sophia sent the day before Will died. Sophia had asked Hazel questions about Will's schedule and what he usually did in the mornings. The message seemed innocent, like maybe she was just curious. But knowing what happened the next day, it felt different. It made me wonder if Sophia's whole victim story was real, or if she was hiding something bigger. I texted back asking Hazel why she was showing me this now. She said she'd been going through old messages and found it. She thought I should know that Sophia had been asking about Will right before he died. I stared at the screenshot for a long time trying to figure out what it meant. Detective Ware called me the next morning while I was getting ready for school. His voice sounded different from usual, less tired and more focused. He told me they had linked the poison to the greenhouse pesticide inventory for sure. The lab confirmed it was the same chemical compound stored in the locked cabinet near the biology classrooms. They had shut down access to that whole area until they finished investigating who had been in and out. I felt this weird mix of relief and fear wash over me. Relief because the investigation was finally moving somewhere real. Fear because it meant someone I sat next to in class, someone I probably talked to every day, had walked into that greenhouse and stolen poison specifically to kill Will. The detective said they were going through sign-in logs and interviewing everyone with greenhouse access. He told me to stay alert and let him know if I remembered anything else about that morning. After I hung up, I just stood there holding my phone. One of my classmates was a murderer, and they were getting closer to figuring out who. Principal Lockhart pulled me out of third period later that day. Her assistant came to my history class and said the principal needed to see me immediately. I walked to the main office, feeling everyone's eyes on me in the hallway. When I got to her office, she was sitting behind her big wooden desk with her hands folded. She didn't tell me to sit down. She said she had received multiple complaints about me harassing other students. I started to explain that I was just trying to find out what happened to Will, but she cut me off. She said my behavior was creating a hostile environment and disrupting the educational process. She actually used those exact words like she was reading from some legal document. If I continued questioning other students or interfering with the investigation, she would have no choice but to take disciplinary action. Suspension or even expulsion were on the table. I stood there feeling my face get hot because it was so obvious she cared more about protecting the school's reputation than helping me find who killed my best friend. She dismissed me and I walked out past her assistant who wouldn't make eye contact. My phone buzzed during lunch. It was a text from Skylar at the coffee shop. She said she had been going through old security camera files from that morning and found something I needed to see. I texted back asking what it was, and she said she would rather show me in person. I left school during my free period and drove to the coffee shop. Skylar was wiping down tables when I walked in. She led me to the back office where they kept the computer with security footage. She pulled up an image on the screen that was grainy and dark. The timestamp showed 8:05 that morning. I leaned closer and saw the water station area where Will had filled his bottle. There was a hand reaching toward that area, just barely visible at the edge of the frame. The image was too blurry to see a face or identify who it belonged to, but it was the first actual visual evidence that someone had been near Will's bottle that morning. Skylar said the camera angle was bad, and this was the only frame that showed anything useful. She offered to send it to my phone, and I said yes immediately. I stared at that grainy image of the hand and felt my heart pounding. I called Lola and asked her to meet me at the library after school. When she got there, I showed her the image Skylar had sent. We zoomed in as much as we could on my phone screen. The hand was wearing a sleeve that had some kind of patch or logo on it. Lola squinted at it and said it looked familiar. She pulled up the school website on her laptop and started clicking through club pages. When she got to the AV club page, my stomach dropped. The members were all wearing hoodies with that exact same patch on the sleeve. It was a small design of a camera with the school initials underneath. Lola looked at me and I looked at her. Josh was in a V club. He had claimed he was in a teacher's office that whole morning, but now we had evidence of someone in an AV club hoodie near Will's water bottle. I saved the image and zoomed in on the patch again. The more I looked at it, the more certain I became that this was the breakthrough we needed. Josh saw me looking at the image on my phone the next day before first period. He walked up to me in the hallway and asked what I was staring at. I turned my phone screen toward him without saying anything. His face went red and he grabbed my wrist. He said those hoodies were sold as a fundraiser 2 years ago and half the school bought them. He started listing names of people who had them, including people who weren't even in AV club anymore. He was right that the hoodie alone didn't prove anything concrete, but the way he got so defensive and the fact that he knew exactly who owned those hoodies made me more suspicious than before. He let go of my wrist and told me to stop trying to frame him for something he didn't do. Then he walked away fast, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. I watched him disappear into the crowd of students and wondered if his anger was because he was innocent or because he was scared of getting caught. Detective Ware called me in after school that same day. When I got to the police station, he led me to a small room with a computer. He said the school district had finally released some security footage from that morning. He pulled up a video file that showed the hallway outside the English classroom. The timestamp read 7:52. A figure in dark clothing walked into frame and tried the classroom door. It was locked. The figure looked around, then pulled something from their pocket. They unlocked the door and went inside. The footage was too far away and the angle was wrong to see their face clearly, but their height and build could match several people, including Josh and Hazel. The detective fast-forwarded, and the figure came back out 4 minutes later. They walked quickly down the hallway and out of frame. The detective paused the video and asked me if I recognized anything about the person's walk or clothing. I stared at the frozen image but couldn't identify them for certain. What I could see clearly was that they had approached the area where Will always left his backpack when he got to class early. I found Hazel after school in the parking lot. She was putting books in her trunk when I walked up. I told her I knew she had been in the classroom that morning. Her whole body went stiff. She closed her trunk slowly and turned to face me. She asked how I knew, and I told her about the security footage. She started crying right there in the parking lot. She said yes, she had been in the classroom, but only to return a book Will had lent her weeks ago. She had borrowed his key to get in because she didn't want to see him face to face. She left the book on his desk and walked out. She swore on everything she never touched his water bottle. She didn't even know it was in his backpack at that point. She kept saying she would never hurt him no matter how much he hurt her. Her voice cracked and she wiped tears off her face with her sleeve. I wanted to believe her because the pain in her voice seemed real. But I also knew that anyone could fake emotion if they were desperate enough. She got in her car and drove away, leaving me standing there in the empty parking lot. That night I sat at my desk and tried to think logically instead of emotionally. I drew a timeline of Will's water bottle from when he filled it to when he drank from it in class. The bottle went from the coffee shop water station to Will's hand, to his backpack, to the English classroom. Someone had added poison at one of those points. The coffee shop seemed most likely based on Skylar's image. But the classroom was possible too based on the security footage. Even the parking lot or hallway between locations could work if someone got access to his backpack. The problem was that multiple people had opportunity at different points. Josh could have done it at the coffee shop if he was there early. Hazel admitted being in the classroom with access to his stuff. Even Sophia had been around that morning based on her own admission. I felt like I was trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces looked identical. I met up with Lola the next day and we spread everything out on her kitchen table. The coffee shop image, the security footage screenshots, the timeline I had drawn, the list of suspects with motives and opportunities. We started mapping out 3 specific windows when the tampering could have happened. Window 1 was at the coffee shop water station between 8:05 and 8:10 based on Skylar's footage. Will was distracted on his phone and someone in an AV Club hoodie was nearby. Window 2 was in the parking lot or hallway between 8:15 and 8:25 while we walked from my car to the building. Someone could have bumped Will or accessed his backpack during that time. Window 3 was in the classroom between 7:50 and 8:30 before Will arrived. The security footage showed someone entering with a key and approaching his desk area. Each window had different suspects with proven or possible opportunity. Lola made notes on her laptop while I stared at the map we had created. The answer was somewhere in these 3 windows, but I couldn't see it clearly yet. A memory hit me suddenly while I was lying in bed that night. I sat up in the dark, remembering something from that morning that I had completely forgotten. Someone had bumped into Will in the hallway between the parking lot and the English classroom. We were walking through the crowded hallway and someone rushed past going the other direction. They knocked into Will hard enough that he dropped his backpack. Books and papers spilled everywhere. At the time, it seemed like a normal accident in the morning rush. Will had laughed it off and we picked everything up together, but now I wondered if it was intentional. If someone had caused that collision specifically to get access to his backpack for a few seconds while he was distracted picking things up. I grabbed my phone and tried to remember who it was that had bumped into him. The face wouldn't come into focus in my memory. Just a blur of movement and the sound of Will's backpack hitting the floor. I texted Lola that I remembered something important and we needed to talk first thing in the morning. Detective Ware called me the next morning while I was getting ready for school. He said the lab had finished analyzing the poison and found something important. The poison was malathion-based, which is a type of pesticide, but someone had mixed it with citrus flavoring to hide the smell and taste. My stomach dropped because Will always added lemon to his water. He was obsessed with it and carried those little lemon packets everywhere. The killer had known his habits well enough to mask the poison in a flavor he expected and wouldn't question. I thanked Detective Ware and hung up, my mind racing through possibilities. The citrus detail changed everything because it meant this wasn't random. Someone had studied Will's routines and planned this carefully. I sat on my bed trying to think about who knew Will always used lemon in his water. Then I remembered something that made my hands go cold. Sophia used to grab handfuls of lemon packets from the coffee shop condiment bar. I had seen her do it dozens of times, and sometimes she would hand them to Will when they were studying together in the library. The connection felt huge and terrifying, but then I forced myself to think logically instead of jumping to conclusions. Sophia had a verified alibi at the counselor's office that morning. She couldn't have been at the coffee shop or in the classroom to poison Will's bottle, unless she had given him the poisoned lemon packet beforehand and he just hadn't used it until that morning. My head hurt trying to work through all the possibilities. Will's mom had asked me to come over and help sort through his stuff because she couldn't face doing it alone. I went to her house that afternoon, and she led me to his room, which looked exactly like it had the last time I was there. His backpack was sitting on his desk chair, and she told me to go through it and keep anything I wanted as a memory. I unzipped the main pocket and started pulling out notebooks and folders. At the bottom, I found a small zippered pouch where Will kept random stuff like gum and hand sanitizer. Inside were 3 lemon packets bundled together with a rubber band. I picked them up and noticed immediately that one felt different. It was heavier than the others, and someone had taped the edges shut with clear tape. My heart started pounding as I stared at it. This had to be it. This was how the killer had done it. I carefully set it down on Will's desk and took photos with my phone from every angle. Then I called Detective Ware and told him what I had found. He said not to touch it anymore and he would send someone to collect it right away. I sat on Will's bed waiting for the police to arrive and felt this weird mix of excitement and dread. This could be the evidence that finally revealed who killed my best friend. The lab results came back 2 days later, confirming what I had suspected. The lemon packet contained traces of the same malathion-based pesticide that killed Will. Detective Ware called me into the station and explained that this was the breakthrough they needed. Someone had preloaded the poison into a lemon packet, knowing Will would add it to his water himself. That's why no one saw anyone directly tampering with his bottle at the coffee shop or in the classroom. Will had essentially poisoned himself without knowing it. The method was smart and terrifying because it meant the killer didn't have to be anywhere near Will when he actually consumed the poison. They just had to get the poisoned lemon packet into his possession at some point before that morning. Detective Ware asked me if I had any idea when someone could have planted it in Will's backpack. I thought about it carefully and told him about the hallway collision that morning when someone bumped into Will hard enough to make him drop his backpack. At the time, it seemed like a normal accident, but now it felt deliberate. Someone had created chaos to access his bag for just a few seconds while he was distracted picking everything up. The question that kept me awake that night was who had been involved in that hallway bump. I tried desperately to remember, but the face wouldn't come into focus. It was just a blur of movement in the crowded morning rush. I knew it was someone from the school because they were wearing our uniform, but that didn't narrow it down much. Lola came over and we tried to recreate the moment using my phone to map out where we had been walking and what direction the person came from. She suggested we check with other students who might have been in that hallway at the same time. Maybe someone else had seen the collision more clearly than I had. We made a list of people whose lockers were in that area and planned to start asking around the next day. At the school the following morning, I ran into Gabe near the main office. He was the school resource officer and had been around during the whole investigation. We started talking about random stuff, and then he mentioned there had been problems with students having copies of room keys that weren't properly checked out. He specifically brought up Josh and said he had been caught with an AV room key that should have been returned to the office. The information made my brain start connecting dots. If Josh had unauthorized access to rooms, he could have been in places without anyone knowing. He could have entered the English classroom early that morning before security footage would have seemed suspicious. He could have accessed storage areas where pesticides were kept. Gabe noticed my expression change and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine and hurried away before he could ask more questions. I found Josh in the gym after school finishing up basketball practice. He was alone shooting free throws and didn't notice me walk in until I was standing right under the basket. I asked him point blank about the unauthorized room keys and whether he had been in the English classroom that morning before Will arrived. His face went red and he told me to get lost. I pressed harder and asked about the hallway collision and whether he had bumped into Will on purpose to access his backpack. Josh shoved me backward and I stumbled but caught myself. He started yelling that I was trying to frame him for something he didn't do. I shoved him back and suddenly we were fighting for real. He punched me in the stomach and I tackled him to the gym floor. We rolled around throwing punches until he pinned me down and got in my face. He said Will deserved what happened for ruining his life with false cheating accusations. The words hung in the air between us, and I watched his expression change as he realized what he had just admitted. He let me go and scrambled backward. I sat up, wiping blood from my split lip. Josh grabbed his stuff and ran out of the gym, leaving me sitting there trying to catch my breath. Detective Ware called me into the station the next day, and his face was serious in a way that made my stomach hurt. He said my confrontation with Josh had potentially compromised the evidence against him. Josh's lawyer was already claiming harassment and coercion, arguing that anything Josh said to me was under duress and couldn't be used in court. I felt terrible realizing that my desperate need for answers might have actually made it harder to prosecute Will's killer. Detective Ware wasn't yelling, but I could tell he was frustrated. He reminded me that I needed to let the professionals handle the investigation instead of going rogue. I apologized and promised to back off, but inside I was screaming because I had finally gotten Josh to admit something important, and now it might not even matter. The legal system felt broken and unfair. Will was dead, and the person who killed him might walk free because I couldn't control myself. Will's mom asked me to come over again a few days later. She said she had found something she wanted to share with me. When I got to her house, she handed me a printed essay that Will had written for English class about 2 months before he died. The title was about pressure and expectations. I sat on her couch and read through it slowly. Will had written about feeling like he had to maintain this perfect image at the school while his family was struggling with money problems. He talked about the stress of trying to seem like everything was fine when really he was worried about whether his parents could afford to send him to college. Reading it made me see him differently. He wasn't just the confident guy everyone thought he was. He was scared and struggling and making terrible choices partly because he felt desperate. It didn't excuse what he did to people like Sophia and Josh, but it made him feel more human and complicated. Will's mom watched me read with tears in her eyes. She said she wished she had known how much pressure he was under, so she could have helped him. I told her it wasn't her fault and that Will had made his own choices. But inside, I wondered if things would have been different if any of us had really seen what was happening with him. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia later that night. She said she needed to tell me something about Hazel that might be important. We met at the coffee shop the next morning before school. Sophia looked nervous and kept glancing around like she was worried someone would overhear. She told me that Hazel had once mentioned knowing exactly which lemon packets Will preferred. Apparently, Will was picky and only liked the ones from a specific brand that the coffee shop sometimes carried. Hazel had joked about how predictable his coffee routine was and how she could probably poison him without him even noticing because he trusted his daily habits so much. Sophia said she hadn't thought much of it at the time because people say dark stuff when they're hurt and angry. But now with everything that had happened, the comment felt sinister and specific. I thanked Sophia for telling me and watched her leave. My mind was spinning again because this redirected everything back toward Hazel. She had knowledge of Will's habits, access to pesticides from the greenhouse, and a clear motive from how badly he had treated her. I pulled out my phone and started typing a message to Detective Ware about this new information. I hit send and watched the message to Detective Ware go through. My phone buzzed almost immediately with his response telling me to come to the station the next morning. I drove straight to Hazel's house because I couldn't wait anymore. She answered the door looking exhausted with red eyes like she'd been crying for hours. I showed her the screenshot from Sophia about the lemon packets and asked her directly what she knew about Will's coffee routine. Hazel's face went completely white and she stepped back like I'd hit her. She started shaking her head and saying she didn't do it over and over. I told her I just needed the truth about that morning and what really happened. She collapsed onto her front steps and buried her face in her hands. Through her tears, she admitted she had gone to the school that morning before anyone else arrived. Will had been threatening to tell everyone she'd stolen things from his house if she didn't return his key. She said she'd been so scared of more lies and accusations that she'd slipped the key into his backpack in the hallway. She swore she never touched his water bottle or put anything in his bag except the key. I watched her cry and realized she was telling the truth about this part at least. She said Will had been getting worse in the weeks before he died, more controlling and mean, like he enjoyed having power over people who couldn't fight back. I sat down next to her on the steps feeling completely drained. The truth was so much messier than I'd wanted it to be. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about how many people had pieces of access and motive, but no clear single answer. Sophia had been coerced, but had an alibi. Hazel had access to pesticides and returned the key, but seemed genuinely devastated. Josh had the AV room access and motive from the suspension, but his timeline was fuzzy. The justice system wanted neat evidence and clear suspects, but real life was complicated and tangled. I realized I might never know exactly who put that poisoned lemon packet in Will's bag or when they did it. Multiple people could have done it at different points that morning. The case might not get solved in the clean way I desperately wanted. Clearing my name was starting to feel like the best outcome I could actually achieve. I met with Lola at the library and she showed me her draft article. She'd been working on it for weeks, documenting everything about the systemic failures at our school. The piece focused on how the administration had ignored Will's dealing and coercion for months because they cared more about protecting the school's reputation than helping students. She'd interviewed people anonymously and gathered evidence about other cases where students had been hurt by the school's refusal to act. Lola promised to keep my involvement completely anonymous while still telling the important parts of the story. She said the article would run in the local paper because the school newspaper's advisor had tried to kill it. Reading through her work made me feel like maybe something good could come from all this pain. The article named Principal Lockhart specifically for blocking investigations and prioritizing image over safety. It detailed how multiple students had tried to report problems and been shut down. Lola had done real journalism that would actually matter. Detective Ware called me in 3 days later, and his expression was serious, but also kind of sad. He told me the lab had found a partial fingerprint on the poisoned lemon packet that matched Josh. My heart started racing because this was finally concrete evidence pointing to someone other than me. But then Detective Ware explained that the chain of custody was completely messed up because of my confrontation with Josh in the gym. Josh's lawyer was already arguing that I'd harassed and coerced his client, which meant anything Josh had said or any evidence connected to him could be thrown out in court. The DA was considering charges, but warned that getting a conviction would be really hard given how I'd compromised the evidence. I felt terrible realizing that my desperate need for answers had actually made it harder to prosecute Will's killer. Detective Ware wasn't yelling, but I could tell he was frustrated with me. He said the fingerprint proved Josh had handled the packet at some point but couldn't prove when or why. Josh could claim he'd touched it innocently at the coffee shop or that I'd planted it. The legal system had all these rules about evidence that made sense in theory, but felt broken when you were living through it. Will was dead, and the person who probably killed him might walk free partly because I couldn't control myself. I apologized again, but Detective Ware just shook his head and said what's done is done. He told me to go home and let the professionals handle the rest. I drove back feeling hollow inside. Lola's article came out on a Friday morning, and by lunch, the whole school was talking about it. The piece was detailed and powerful, showing how Principal Lockhart had repeatedly ignored complaints about student safety. It included quotes from anonymous students about Will's dealing and coercion, and documented other cases where the administration had covered up problems. Parents started calling the district office demanding answers. The school board announced an emergency meeting for that weekend. By Monday morning, Principal Lockhart had resigned, and the district was launching a full review of safety protocols. Josh stopped coming to the school entirely, withdrawing amid all the attention and scrutiny. I heard his family was talking to lawyers about suing the school and possibly moving away. The hallways felt different with everyone processing what the article had revealed. Some students were mad at Lola for airing everything publicly. Others thanked her for finally speaking up about things everyone had known but ignored. The whispers about my involvement in Will's death started to quiet down as people focused on the bigger systemic problems. I still got some suspicious looks, but the social pressure was finally shifting away from me. It wasn't complete vindication, but it was something. I could walk through the halls without feeling like everyone thought I was a murderer. Will's mom called and asked me to come over. I drove to her house feeling nervous about what she wanted to say. She made tea, and we sat in the living room where pictures of Will covered every surface. She told me she'd been thinking a lot about who her son really was versus who she'd wanted him to be. The investigation had revealed things about Will that she'd never known, things that made her question if she'd really understood him at all. I admitted that I'd been struggling with the same thing, missing my friend while also facing the reality of how he'd hurt people. Will's mom started crying and said she wished she'd paid more attention to the pressure he was under and the choices he was making. I told her it wasn't her fault that Will had made bad decisions. We talked for over an hour about the complicated person Will had been, both the good friend I remembered and the manipulative dealer who'd coerced classmates. She thanked me for seeking the truth even when it revealed uncomfortable realities about her son. She said she'd rather know who Will really was than live with a false, perfect memory. Our relationship would never be the same as it was before, but we reached this fragile understanding that felt honest. We agreed that we could honor Will's memory while also acknowledging the harm he'd caused. It wasn't about choosing one version of him over the other, but accepting that he'd been both things at once. I was cleaning out my locker after a long day when Gabe found me in the hallway. He'd been the school resource officer through everything, maintaining these professional boundaries while still trying to help where he could. He handed me a box with some of Will's belongings that had been held as evidence and were finally released. Inside were Will's watch, his phone case, and some other small things that his mom had asked Gabe to give to me. The gesture was simple, but it meant something. This quiet moment of care from someone who could have just mailed the stuff or left it in the office. Gabe asked how I was holding up, and I told him the truth, that I was doing better but still processing everything. He said he'd seen a lot of cases where the system failed people, and he was sorry this had been so hard. We stood there in the empty hallway, and I felt grateful that there were still people like Gabe trying to do right even within broken systems. He told me to call if I ever needed anything and then left me alone with the box. I looked through Will's things and felt this mix of sadness and acceptance. The investigation hadn't given me all the answers I'd wanted, but it had given me something, a clearer picture of reality and my place in it. The next day in English class, I made a decision. Will's desk had sat empty for weeks with nobody willing to sit there. I walked in and put my stuff down at his old spot. Mrs. Phillips looked surprised but didn't say anything. When she asked if anyone wanted to share memories of Will, I raised my hand. I talked about missing my friend, about the jokes we'd shared and the plans we'd made for college. But I also said that Will had hurt people and made choices that caused real damage. I refused to pretend he was perfect just because he was dead. But I also refused to let his mistakes erase the real friendship we'd had. The complexity felt right somehow, more honest than either extreme. Some classmates looked uncomfortable, but others nodded like they understood. Mrs. Phillips thanked me for sharing and moved on with the lesson. I sat in Will's desk for the rest of class feeling steadier than I had in weeks. I wasn't absolved of the suspicion completely, and the grief wasn't gone. But I was ready to move forward with the truth I'd found, messy and incomplete as it was. Will had been my best friend, and he'd also been someone who hurt people. Both things were true. I could miss him while acknowledging what he'd done. The case might never be fully solved, and Josh might never face real consequences. But I'd done what I could to find answers and clear my name. That would have to be enough.